And hopefully you guys can hear me if I stand over here, because I want to point to a couple of slides and things, because they're a little busy. So, we all know that data matching is integral to the media ecosystem, the measurement ecosystem we work in right now, but we don't know enough about it. I found the TruthSet study really, really enlightening, and hopefully you'll find this one adds another layer. So what were we after here was we wanted to look at data matching. Now, when you talk about data matching, people talk about what's the match rate. Okay, well, that's kind of interesting. That's kind of important. I had never heard anyone ask the question, what happens to the data after it's matched? Is it biased? Does it look like the original data you started with? And that was part of the issue for us. So we did matching at 3 critical stages. So SIM, right, so it's about television. So first there's television data. We have 2 sets of television data, and they're brought into the IDR provider, the match companies, house, and matched to their graph. So that's the first match that happens. Second thing that happens is it's matched to demographics. A third thing that happens, separate from the demographics, is the TV data is matched to outcome data for advanced audiences or sometimes for attribution. I want to say just one caveat here. We took these matches at face value. It wasn't our preference, but we didn't have a validation set like TruthSet to be able to rate the accuracy of the matches. So bear in mind, there's another layer to this, which we match accuracy. So for those of you who prefer pictures, this gives me a chance to thank the participants. So we had 5 IDR companies you see listed up here who were kind enough to work with us. They did a lot of work. This was a big, big effort, and I appreciate the fact that they were contributing to industry knowledge with their data and their time and their energy. And then we had 4 data sets we worked with. So TV data from TiVo and Samba. You'll see them referred to as TV1 and TV2. So we looked at them separately just to see is there a difference because of the underlying data set we began with. Demos came from Claritas. Outcomes in terms of restaurant visits came from Playsite 2. So the first thing that happens is I said the TV data comes into the IDR provider's house, gets matched to their graph. The demo data gets matched to the graph. The outcome data gets matched to the graph. And then the demo data gets matched to the viewing data. So there's another data set. And the outcome data gets matched to the viewing data into a third data set. And all of this is showed in the full report. We're going to have a real breezy snapshot here. So the first question, what was the match rate? Well, the match rates on average were pretty good. And depending upon the data set, on average, 2/3 to 3/4 roughly matched. And we started with small data sets for big data, a little over 2 million. And you wind up with a somewhat smaller, not terrible record count after the matching process. But we stopped and thought about it. So what does this mean? If you were doing audience measurement and you had a 0.1 rated show and you were looking at the audience among auto intenders, right? Is that good enough? Well, yeah, that would give you a 0.9 9% tolerance at a 95% confidence level around that rating estimate. So that's pretty good in the world we've been living in. Tolerance is much, much greater than that. But one thing I do want to point out is we saw, and Catherine pointed this out in the TruthSet show as well, there was big variation by provider and data set. So the match rate could have been as low as 60% or as high as 82%. So the data set you choose and the provider, the match provider, the IDR provider you choose makes a difference. So now let's look at viewing data. So just bringing the viewing data in from our 2 providers into the match, into the IDR provider's house, matching to their graph. We found that looking at Monday through Friday, all day viewing hours as one metric, we found in one case, the viewing levels were overstated by 2%, no big deal, or 9%, no big deal. You think about that versus sampling error, really is no big deal. What's interesting though is again, difference by provider. There was one match provider with one of these TV data sets where the overstatement of viewing was 25%. That gets to be material when you think in terms of the impact on CPM. So there was a bias towards heavier viewers. The next thing we did was we looked at demographics. So this is a busy chart. So what we have is on the top row, income, and we took the total households and split them by the upper income half and the lower income half. And then you have age. So we split the older half and the younger half. And here's with TV data set 1, TV data set 2. And just to call your attention to what happens here, if we look at income, after the match process, the original data, the Claritest data, matched against the TV data, suddenly there's 29% more upper income households in TV set 1 and in TV set 2, very similar. So it's fairly robust, 18% overstatement of upper income households. When we looked at age, we saw a somewhat similar, possibly related pattern. 10% overstatement of older customers here, 20% overstatement of older customers here. So the matching process itself produces a data set that is older and more upscale. And if you think about that, let's say you're really old school and you're buying an 1849 audience. Well, possibly 20% or so of your audience just moved out of the target demographic that the client's paying on. That's kind of third point is looking at outcomes, right? So for advanced audiences or attribution, and we had data from PlaceIQ and all the chains, but we broke it down for the purposes here because it's a lot to look at into QSRs, casuals, and fast casual restaurants. And again, here's matching against one TV data set, here's matching against the other TV data set, very similar pattern. So it wasn't so much about the TV data set as it was the matching process itself. And with the first TV data set, we saw casual restaurant visit levels overstated by 9%, fast casual by 16%. In this data set, similar, casuals overstated by 12%, visits to fast casuals overstated by 10%. Again, that's really not so terrible on average, but the ranges were a little eye-opening. So the worst case scenario was one of the IDR providers overstated visits to fast casual restaurants by 77%. Now think about if you were doing an attribution study, you didn't even have to advertise, just match the data and you got a 77% lift. So that's a little concerning. Now I say that knowing that when people do attribution carefully, that would have been worked out, that would have not been a problem, but not everyone does attribution so carefully. And all right, so 77% is really kind of a high watermark, but we consistently saw 50% overstatements in some cases here, and consequently understatement of QSR. So I want you to suspense. All right, so what did we learn? We learned that matching big data sources generally results in sufficient scale. That's not the problem. That's not the issue at all. That's great, and it opens up so many doors. We can do so many things that we couldn't do before because we have sufficient sample size to slice them, and dice them endlessly. However, biases may be introduced, and as I just showed, we saw biases towards heavier viewers, older, more upscale consumers, and with a lower share of requirements for QSRs. They kind of hang together, right? Older, more upscale, less QSR, heavier viewers, yes. Okay, so it kind of makes sense, and it also makes sense in terms of mobility of households. So the older, more upscale household have been in their homes for a long time. They haven't moved. Their street addresses haven't changed, and so forth. Younger people will move around more so. So there's more difficulty there, which is we suspect where the biases get introduced. I think the biggest thing we saw is that results vary, sometimes materially by data source and IDR graph. So you can look at the averages and say, well, that's not great, that's good, that's great. But if you pick a particular provider, you may get a very different result. And we also didn't see a consistent provider. There wasn't always one IDR company that was better than the others. Sometimes it was company A, sometimes it was company B. They really different. So where that leaves us in terms of advice on the coming out of the study is that the broad sweeping generalization is make sure your post-match data still looks like the world as you know it. Because you may start with good data, you may look at, test, evaluate the data, say, yeah, that's really pretty good. It looks just like our customer base, and off we go. After the matching is done, and you may have 1, 2, 3 levels of matching that are done, and things happen at each step, that data may become very distorted at that point. So make sure it still looks like the world as you know it. 2 things you can do about that. One of the things that we observed, this is somewhat kind of an inference we've made, is we saw this difference by match provider, and very often we heard, oh, well, yeah, we did pretty well because we have a crosswalk with that company, right? So what, as you probably all know, what that means is time and energy and money has been invested in quality control so that you have quality at the source and that those matches are generally always going to be better. If you're in the previous presentation, it was Kate asked for the bottom 10% of bad matches to just be eradicated. That's a brilliant idea, because that will happen. So when you invest in quality control, you get a better result. And the other thing you can do is look at the post-match data and you go, oh my God, what happened to it? Well, what have we done in research for decades? You can weight the data, or you can adjust the data in some way that makes sense. So I think this is the first time I've ever seen a disclosure about bias being introduced by the match process. It's not the end of the world. There are solutions, but it means you have to take care, you have to look at the data, and you have to take some action. With that, we're going to start the panel in a moment, but this was a long, arduous project, and I have to thank my partners, Howard Schimmel. Howard, where's your? Gerard Broussard, my partner Alice Sylvester, who's in Chicago, waving her hand right now, and of course all the companies that work with us to get this done. So I think Gerard.
Thank you. Jim, looks like you've been introduced and I've been introduced.
Oh, good.
Yeah, I know we had nobody come in here and say, hey, here's how it starts today, right? So I have an advisory service, premeditated media, Jim, as you guys know, we see the parties from Dallas. Jay, you want to?
Sure. Hi, Jay Priak. I spent a long time on the agency side, most recently across media, and currently an interesting analyst. You can find my newsletter on LinkedIn called The Commons of Advertising. We all have common problems. It means we should all have common solutions. I'm just happy to be here.
Great. All right. So we have like 9 quality minutes before 1 o'clock, which is lunchtime. A little bit of a squeeze here. I'm going to put this down. Unless you can't hear me, let me know. Right? I think I'm projecting okay. I think the first thing, a place to start really is to understand the type of use cases that might be used for TV matching and talk about what might be most typical. But when you think about it, you could match against a TV data to inform national TV planning, for example, versus, let's say, an MVPD or an OEM, and have activation within those footprints, right? They're kind of different. They sort of move around a bit. If you're looking for a subset, let's say, of one of those of the OEM or to project a national, then some of the work that we've done here has useful applications for that. So Jay, you want to comment on what you have found is to be most prevalent, or what you've come across? Oh yeah, the use case for matching TV data. So for example, projecting to a national TV plan, or just an activation within a footprint, so like for an MVPD.
I think it's on the front end and the back end, right? You want to see how many of those people you reach. You want to see how many of those people take action. So the activation side and the measurement side are the ones that really care most about that. Probably not as much for insight. And I think both the true set analysis and then the analysis that we just went through, if you had done enough pre-planning work, you would know or have a better idea of what you were going to get out of it. So you may not need to partner with 6 different identity resolution providers. You can do all of that pre-work in the testing environment because you can crosswalk multiple partners all at the same time. So to me, that's the big aha in all of this is like, we did all of this work and we should do all of that work and we should do it every time. Now we can do it more and have, at worst, a good baseline for what we expect to come out on the back end, and then do predictive analysis as well. There's a lot of great apps out there.
Were there any surprises or confirmations of what your experience has already been when matching TV data with consumer data set from the study?
They seem pretty in line. I think if anything, I was surprised to the upside with minimums in the 60%. Knowing that some of the other match rates tend to be much lower depending on the identifiers that you use. But that was a good surprise out of the data that I saw.
Yeah, so then, in the truth set session that preceded this one, there was discussion about match accuracy. And we'll give an example of match accuracy basically. So it could be an IP address correctly matched to a household, or device ID matched to a household. So this whole push and pull between scale and accuracy. How do you strike a happy medium there, and what do you focus on?
I think it comes back to the same words. It depends. So when you need accuracy and when you expect things to be absolutely deterministic, you have to put accuracy above everything else. But if you are looking at research or measurement in aggregate, you can get away with a little bit less accuracy because the bias will be accounted for in the models that you do. It'll be accounted for in the weighting that you do. I don't see where, I don't know, I don't see a world where we're going to ever be 100% deterministic anyway. So understanding the accuracy, I think, also puts a cap on the types of use cases you can use. So knowing what you're starting with is really good to know, really good to apply to what you're going to do with it.
I suppose if you pay a cheaper CPM, then maybe the accuracy issue is dampened a little, but
Well,
I don't think that's where we want to go.
well, yeah. Anything I can do to show 15% savings procurement, I will.
Let me add just one thing to that, because you have to look at this with some perspective. We've been living in a world with panel data for quite some time, and there's a lot of sampling error around panel data. So, if that's the benchmark we need to beat, then the question is, how do you have these processes be accurate enough to be at least as accurate as what we've had before? And all too often in our business, we just say, well, the rating, it's got a 0.5. Well, it's got a 0.5 plus or minus 50%. So we're doing, we have some issues and we have some things that we can solve, but we're doing better.
So, and probably as you witnessed yesterday and some of today's sessions, so there's no perfect data set. There's a potpourri of data sets out there, the set-top box for TV, and I'm going to focus mostly on TV, OEM, for example, panel data, and so on. And each of them, as you guys know in this room, has their strengths and weaknesses. And then, of course, you lay that on top of or in juxtaposition with the ID providers, match companies. Is there anything that you should do after the matches come back to that match data to help it become in line with what your expectations might be for the population you're trying to investigate?
Well, it's kind of the sum of everything above, right? Because if you do have a panel of one set-top box, another panel of something else, and a third panel of something else, and now we're getting into the streaming TV, CTV world, you end up with 6 different panels being representative of 6 different audiences with some overlap across. So the question is how can you create an Uber panel of your own making that will be more representative than just saying, yeah, we're just going to use set-top box data because that's what we have. That's great. It's a good starting point. But then if that is all that you have, how are you going to accommodate the skew of that, which we saw, or the skews of the data that you come out of that with, so that it is more representative and less biased in that way?
Yeah, in the session before this one, there was discussion of sort of an Uber panel, but then I suppose private interests, of the companies and that compete with each other are probably holding us back in that regard.
I mean, the question is if you have 5 major TV conglomerates, could you cobble it together with them as a starting point, right? So if you work with Disney, if you work with NBC, if you work with Paramount, can that be a starting point to ground us because they have multiple touch points within that? It might be worth looking at, but I think the industry needs something that's much more objective than what these guys want us to do.
I think that's the ideal, certainly. And that's why you have conferences like this. It's sort of the hopefully bring people together. Hopefully. Now, I have a question for the audience here, and maybe by a show of hands, you can say yay or nay. But for those that have had experience with matching TV data sets to consumer data sets, you guys ever weight the data after the match? Well, first of all, okay. All right, so yeah, because one of the recommendations of the study is to sort of make course corrections for the what the data is after the match versus what you're projecting. So that's encouraging. And then I guess a question for Jim. This might be a good one for you. is if you weighted the data, and I guess this is another answer, it depends, but what benefit do you hope that would accrue to that, either outcomes or accuracy of matching?
Right, well, let's take two use cases, right? So, in audience measurement, we pointed out an older and upscale bias. And so if after the matching, you put all the data together and it winds up at a table, a nice little something you can look at that says, our total impressions delivery against 18 to 49 was a number that the media is going to get paid for. Well, in fact, some of those, if you didn't wait, some of those 50 plus people are in fact actually on 49. So there was more in target delivery, and the media would be underpaid if you didn't weight the data. In the case of attribution, it's kind of the case I mentioned. If you look at the QSRs and you had the worst case, you just got really unlucky and you picked the wrong data, the wrong provider, you put them together, and you have an artifactual 77% overstatement of visits to Bonefish Grill. You're going to run to the client and say, we drove 77% more sales, and they're going to say, yeah, we didn't see that. So it's not unimportant.
No. So and I'm glad to see that some folks are waiting after the match. So we're at, I think, 101 or 102 over here. I'm going to throw out one more question and lean on your politeness to be attentive, just for 1 minute. So one of the study recommendations is to ask the matching companies for summary level statistics. After the match is done at a summary level, to see whether, let's say, the TV data aligned with after the match looked like the TV data that was before the match. And then there's a whole bunch of other demographics you can ask the providers to give you, in case there's any problems prior to using the data in the marketplace. What do you think about that as a practice, as an advocacy for helping to move things along for the IDR providers?
More transparency is better. So understanding the results can help you balance the results better when you apply weighting to different characteristics. So I don't see a downside to that. I don't even see a downside as to why they wouldn't apply. Yeah. But to me, you're always going to lead with transparency, and the more visibility that you have into the data, the whys of the data, and a reference point to know that what you got back was what you should have gotten back. To me, is always a good thing.
Editorial comment to close the session here, and that transparency has been an issue, I think, for many of the people that use match data and what the ID providers provide prior to the match. So it's always good to ask a lot of questions. Just on getting some comparison of the post-match TV. Thanks for your attention.